The biggest issue that cryptocurrencies have suffered from is a lack of tangible things to actually use them on as currencies, rent or food or transit. This is for pretty simple reasons.
And now we're going to talk about the viability of cryptocurrencies as a medium of exchange. Now, I did say earlier that I don't necessarily support the use of Bitcoin specifically as an economy-level medium of exchange in its current form by itself. It's not the only supply-capped asset, and aside from that, there are plenty of assets that are not supply-capped. There are those with fixed monetary policies and those with variable monetary policies. Keep this in mind, and we'll continue a little bit with the video.
One is that the transaction fees on popular chains are so prohibitive that it's pointless to use them on any transaction that is in hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. No one is going to buy the Bitcoin bucket from their local KFC. Ethereum's main transaction fee, called gas, on a good day runs around $20 US per transaction, but that's severely optimistic.
So the issue of transaction fees is a very valid point here, especially with regard to Ethereum. That's a big one these days. It's a very spirited conversation. Once again, I'll refer you back to layer 2 scaling solutions from before, but let's also note that there are some layer 1 blockchains, the newer ones, that have more favorable fees and performance metrics like Solana and Avalanche. When I say lower fees, obviously you have to take into account the fact that there's less congestion, less use of these networks. But even accounting for that, models suggest that these lower fees to start with scale up pretty darn well, even if the network were to become more congested like Ethereum or Bitcoin. If you're starting off multiple orders of magnitude with lower fees, but even smaller than that in terms of actual usage, it goes to reason that once you get up there in terms of usage, those fees should remain lower than the current chains like Ethereum or Bitcoin. Now, this being said, with regard to Ethereum right now, this is a very valid criticism. It seems really obvious right now that they did not expect Ethereum to actually succeed as much as it did. Like, they said that they planned on succeeding, but they weren't actually prepared to succeed like this. They're a victim of their own success, and ultimately, it is a problem. It's a real problem.
These gas wars aren't localized to just the thing that's being fought over. If Steam is getting hammered because ConcernedApe posted Stardew Valley 2 by surprise, that will probably stay pretty well contained. If Taylor Swift concert tickets go on sale and Live Nation gets crushed, you might never even know. What those don't do is cause the cost of placing an order on DriveThruRPG to spike by 8,000% for 3 hours.
These are, once again, very valid criticisms of many layer 1s right now. This way, there's a switch to a lot of these layer 2s that move a lot of the computation and stuff off-chain and compartmentalize a lot of this network load so that one part shouldn't affect everything else if it just ends up being really, really popular. Now, there are actually a number of layer 1 type solutions that allow for this type of compartmentalization, particularly shard chains and alternative chain architectures like Ethereum's sharding model or even Cadena's chain web that we talked about before. However, most solutions that are meant to address this type of thing tend to focus on layer 2 these days. The main takeaway here is that this is by no means a necessary feature of all blockchains and is also by no means an insurmountable problem. Remember when you had to dial up the internet with your phone line? I do. Remember when the 2 megabyte download that you had going for the last couple of hours would get interrupted and potentially fail entirely if your mom made an unexpected phone call? I do. Remember when none of that was a problem when you came in to watch this video? Yeah, it's kind of like that. If we'd simply called the internet unworkable at a time when it lacked proper infrastructure and the technology wasn't as well developed, we wouldn't have gotten this far.
The second big reason is that value on the coins themselves is so volatile that unless you're willing to engage with the speculative nature of the coins, there's actually a huge risk in accepting them as payment for anything.
Absolutely true. And this is another reason why I don't necessarily think Bitcoin is ready to be used as a currency. And I don't really agree with the way El Salvador did their legal tender bill, where they fined companies for not accepting Bitcoin. Now, this is not necessarily to say that Bitcoin could never be used as a, currency once the volatility goes down at a higher market cap, like we were talking about earlier. Of course, I did already talk about how that volatility over time is going down. I'll refer you to that previous section. And next he'll bring up the issue of stablecoins, which is of course the crypto world's answer to this problem. So basically there's crypto coins that are pegged to the value of, say, the dollar or gold or yuan, whatever it is that you're trying to transact in. And they basically allow you to lock in gains via their own separate liquidity pools. Now, he does say that the point of crypto is to starve public services, which I take issue with. Governments are currently in the process of drafting policy regarding taxation of crypto assets, and I very much doubt that the lack of regulation and taxation in stablecoins is going to last much longer at all. If anything, crypto is about getting away from the perceived destabilizing effects of central bank monetary policies, which by debasing the currency have contributed to national debt burdens and incentivized our modern neglect of our public services. Then he goes on to address the 800-pound gorilla in the world of cryptocurrencies, Tether. This is a subject I've mentioned in my Risks in Crypto video, and I definitely share this concern about stablecoin regulation, which at this point is coming. Even high-profile crypto natives like Sam Bankman-Fried have testified to Congress about the need for things like daily attestations and regular audits in order to make sure that stablecoins are legitimately collateralizing and maintaining their pegs. And so this is likely what's going to happen in the future. Providers like Tether are going to have to start complying with the rules once they actually make them. Now, there's definitely problems in the space of stablecoins, but stablecoins are, at this point, a critical part of the decentralized finance infrastructure. If you'd like to find out more about the whole Tether issue in general, I would highly recommend CoffeeZilla's videos on the subject, which I'll link to in the description as well. He then points out that stablecoins are needed to add liquidity so that larger holdings can be cashed out. That's a particularly important argument if you're talking about things like countries evading sanctions. There's simply not the liquidity to do that and actually run an entire country's liquidity. We're using just crypto at this point. It's just not large enough of a liquidity source in order to do that. Not necessarily as important for our purposes right now. He then leads into the greater fool argument.
The whole thing operates by buying worthless assets, believing that you will later be able to sell them to a bigger fool.
Now, a pretty standard response to this, and one that I've personally used from time to time, is to point out that assets like housing, stocks, derivatives, and certainly collectibles like Pokemon cards or comics all basically function on essentially the same principle. However, that logic, the way it's phrased there, does kind of miss the forest for the trees, as it were. While it's true that many assets that we've historically seen as being worthwhile to invest in do essentially require a so-called greater fool dynamic, that's not really the point. Really, the operative word here is worthless. Folding Ideas has spent most of the video so far trying, unsuccessfully, to undermine the use cases for crypto, and if you take him at his word, which by now you should probably realize that you shouldn't, that would potentially be a fair valuation. If it's worthless, then truly you would have to be a greater fool in order to buy it. On top of this, if there's no adoption, then those use cases would even be irrelevant. But as we've already seen, and will continue to see throughout this video, there are use cases, and adoption is only growing. One can make a compelling case at this early stage regarding which crypto assets will or will not have staying power in the long term. But with every year that goes by, it seems less and less sensible to try and make the argument that none of them will. For more of my thoughts about the value of money and what intrinsic value means and how it applies to things like crypto assets, you can see the video in the top right. Next, we're going to skip ahead a little to Chapter 7, Crypto Reality. At around the hour and 20-minute mark, Folding Ideas comments on wallet managers, specifically MetaMask, which I'll only comment on briefly. Actually, JP Morgan essentially has a controlling stake in MetaMask at this point, which is a pretty important part of the Ethereum infrastructure, and that does not look good. So I'm not necessarily somebody who is super committed to defending MetaMask, honestly. There are other better wallet managers in my opinion, but it is a very popular wallet manager, and there are some important concepts here that we should go over. There's various wallets you can use, both hot wallets, which are connected to the internet, and cold wallets that are not directly connected to the internet, which have varying levels of security and interoperability. MetaMask in particular was developed by Consensus in 2016 and has grown to integrate a lot of features. He points out that hot wallets like this present themselves as an obvious point of attack. Now, we should note that most hackers aren't really necessarily going to go through the effort of hacking a hot wallet for the payoff of one individual's crypto account, at least not at the moment. More commonly, what happens is that the hot wallets belonging to exchanges get hacked, and that's great reason not to leave your money on the exchanges. Now, the fact remains that hot wallet attacks do happen, and with regard to MetaMask specifically, he brings up 2 points. One, that it doesn't obfuscate key phrases in the UI, and that the matter of two-factor authentication. If he's talking about private keys, you need that to load up the wallet in the first place, and presumably you're not dumb enough to just have that out in the open when you do it. Also, it doesn't straight up display your private keys unless you go into the menu and click on it, in which case, presumably you want it to be displayed. And if he's talking about public keys, those are truncated in the main UI so that you can't actually see it all, and they aren't displayed fully unless you go into your account details and look at it. And presumably, if you're going to do that, once again, you would want it displayed. Also, you can look up people's public keys on Etherscan. I know he knows this because he does it later with the overly attached girlfriend meme lady. But honestly, I don't know that I'm exactly following his point. I may have missed that one, so I don't have as much to say about it. I do have more to say about the two-factor authentication thing, because it does actually have two-factor authentication. It just doesn't call it that. MetaMask and many other hot wallets essentially have the option of linking to something like a Trezor or Ledger device. These are cold wallets that more or less act as the two-factor authentication for the hot wallet. Now, there are others, but those are the most popular ones that have, compatibility with the most number of hot wallets. Now, they specifically don't use the traditional SMS or app-based two-factor authentication because these are seen as third-party points of failure, whereas the cold wallet is a signature solution that is in your power, in your hands from start to finish. You have to have a physical device. You're the only one that has it. There isn't a third party that can out you to the government or otherwise, accidentally give your information to a hacker, because as he pointed out, that's often what happens. Real life hacking is just some dude calling the company and asking for, a connection through them. That's actually how most simjacking attacks work as well.
Remember, again, that these people want to put medical